We've got a lot to talk about this week, and some of it's good news in that, hey, some game bundles, but my thought on these game bundles interpreted with the Ryzen 9000 CPU reviews is that this is kind of even more awkward for the Ryzen 9000 CPUs, because the biggest problem with the Ryzen 9000 CPUs, at least from a gaming perspective, has been that they're not much faster than their 7000 series predecessors, and they come with a much higher price in the current market. Well, AMD is sweetening the deal on the 7000 series CPUs here by throwing in a couple of games. Which games? Warhammer 40,000, Space Marine 2, and Unknown 9 Awakening. This also applies to a bunch of the 7000 series GPUs from AMD. Looks like they're leaving off the 7600 non-XT. And also, if you live in Japan, the starred products here apparently don't apply for the promotion. This promotional deal is running, it looks like, from August 6th to October 5th, and then you have until November 2nd to redeem them. Now, again, this is kind of a bit awkward for the 9000 series CPUs, which are left out of this deal, kind of even sweetening the deal for the previous generation, like I said, from a gaming perspective. But also, for two GPUs on this list, the 7700 XT and 7800 XT, there's actually a really interesting deal right now because AMD's previous game bundle for those two GPUs specifically allowed you to choose two of these four games. Unless you live in Japan, you only choose one of them. Apparently, AMD game bundles are just worse in Japan. But the point is that you can, again, choose two of these four games. But the thing is that this game bundle is actually running through August 31st. Which means that there is some overlap between these bundles. And actually, an AMD representative reached out to me through email to actually confirm that these do indeed stack. So that's interesting. So in other words, if you're buying the 7800 XT or 7700 XT specifically, you would be able to choose two of these four games, and you would get the Warhammer 40k, Space Marine 2, and Unknown 9 Awakening. So actually 4 games currently available with the 7700 XT and 7800 XT, which are currently sitting at pretty decent places in price to performance. You can get the 7800 XT at $480, and its closest competitor is the from Nvidia is the 4070, which comes in at $540. So pretty reasonable discount available there. And the 7700 XT, the initial launch price on this thing was pretty terrible, but currently they're sitting at $375 on the cheapest models. And that certainly stacks up fairly well against the 4060 Ti 8GB that's currently its closest price competitor. So anyway, that's pretty interesting, but like I said, it just feels a little bit awkward for the 9000 series CPUs being left off this list when they already seem to be a worse value, at least from a gaming perspective, than what we're seeing for the 9000 series. Speaking of the 9000 series, okay, let's talk. So we're seeing that AMD's new Zen 5 CPUs are failing to impress during early reviews. AMD made kind of big promises that didn't seem to be lived up to. I've already done a whole video with most of my thoughts on this, talking about the 9700X and 9600X. Now we've, since my last video on the topic, we've seen the higher core count parts release. So is that any different? Well, you've probably already watched the reviews, but if I just pull up something like here's Tech Power-Ups results, you can see that, for example, the 9950X, or with PBO, it gets a 0.4% improvement, or with an OC where gaming performance regresses. The point is that, okay, are they performing well? Sure. But how well are they performing in gaming specifically compared to the 7950X? Well, within about 2% of the performance. So if the gaming performance is within 2% of the predecessor and the price is higher on the current market, it's just not that exciting. And again, those big gains seen from PBO in certain workloads do not seem to apply to gaming. And we've had multiple other outlets address this more specifically. Hardware Unboxed did a re-review of some of the processors where they looked more at PBO and looked at it stacked up against like the non-X counterparts and things like that. And again, just confirming that for gamers, the 9000 series seems to be a bit of a flop, at least at launch pricing. And like I said, AMD's sweetening the deal on the previous generation. So it's a bit rough from a gaming perspective. Also, we're seeing reports that sales seem to be indicating that. So we're seeing an article here from Tech Power Up. By the way, all my sources today will be linked in the video description as usual, so feel free to follow up on all of that. But we're seeing it reported that Mind Factory only sold a few dozen AMD Ryzen 7 9700X and Ryzen 5 9600X CPUs. Mind Factory being a very large retailer, so only selling numbers in the dozens is on the launch of a big new CPU generation. Doesn't look great. So anyway, things aren't looking awesome. One of the few highlights of this generation was, as actually reported here, that the Zen 5 generation was salvaged somewhat by their better energy efficiency. However, in my last video, I talked about how I didn't think the efficiency gains were as large as was initially reported in some reviews, comparing the 9700X against the 7700X, because the 7700X wasn't really running at an efficient point in the power efficiency curve, whereas the 7700 non-X was at a more similar point in the efficiency curve compared to the 9700X. And again, we've had multiple outlets now looking more in depth at those power claims. For example, you could follow up on the Gamers Nexus review, doing a power efficiency deep dive for a whole bunch of CPUs and confirming that while in certain very specific workloads, Zen 5 does have an efficiency gain, it's certainly not across the board and definitely not in gaming, at least in most gaming workloads. So the point is that even those efficiency gains are rather small, and only in certain workloads are they particularly impressive, or even existent at all. And certain workloads are actually an efficiency regression compared to the 7000 series, especially when comparing against the non-X parts, which are, like I said, at a more similar point in the efficiency curve. So, however, we have seen this grain of actually very positive reviews happening as well. And those reviews, like the one I'm highlighting here from Phoronix, are often looking at these more in terms of the types of workloads you might see in Linux or in server applications and things like that. So these 9000 series processors, again, it's not that there's not a place where they perhaps make sense. It's just that really isn't gaming, which is what I focus on my channel. This Phoronix review of the 9950X and 9900X is titled, "They Deliver Excellent Linux Performance." And I'll link this in the video description, and there's 15 pages of content here. But if you want to get to the overall conclusion, with the geomean of all the test results, you can actually see that the 9950X and 9900X come out actually significantly ahead of not only all the competition, but specifically even their previous generation predecessors, like the 7950X, which, again, if we look at the gaming workloads that we saw over at, like Tech Power Up, for example, like I highlighted over here, where there was almost no generational improvement, again, depending on the workloads you test, there actually can be very large generational improvements, which is pretty interesting. And if you highlight kind of the conclusion from this article, he's saying when taking the geometric mean of all the raw performance results, the Ryzen 9 9950X came out to being 17.8% faster than the Ryzen 9 7950X. And the Ryzen 9 9900X, meanwhile, was 21.5% faster than the Ryzen 9 7900X across this wide mix of workloads. Again, so the point is that depending on what you want these for, the results of this generational uplift can be very different. And where we're seeing the more positive results, this isn't the only one, I'm just highlighting this one in particular as kind of an example, is what you want to do with these, right? So for gaming, extremely lackluster until we see prices go way down. But for other workloads, you might want to pay attention to the benchmark results, because there certainly are places where these are actually somewhat exciting, or at least reasonable generational uplifts. So do just keep that in mind. And it really looks like when you look at the architectural changes from Zen 4 to Zen 5, it's very clear that they were made with server applications in mind. And then, it just kind of is what it is when it came to gaming performance uplifts. Now, that being said, AMD had claimed larger gaming performance than what we actually saw from independent reviewers. And Hardware Unboxed released a really interesting video today. I'm just going to show you one of the slides and talk to you about a bit about the overall idea, but I highly encourage you to watch the full video. It's only about 13 minutes long, and if you're like me, you watch all YouTube videos at like 2x speed, so come on, you got 6 or 7 minutes. Anyway, the discussion with AMD that Steve at Hardware Unboxed was having about their results and why Hardware Unboxed results and a lot of other reviewers' results seem just a few percent lower than what AMD was seeing in their testing, uncovered a really interesting thing that was going on with Windows. And also, again, we were seeing maybe slightly more positive results on Linux than on Windows, so kind of interesting, right? Well, apparently, if you enable a hidden admin level account within Windows, not just normal running a user as an admin, but, and again, watch the full Hardware Unboxed video and it'll explain how you can use a command line prompt to enable this admin account, that they were actually seeing better performance on the 9700X running in that hidden admin mode versus not. Now, at first, that seems like the smoking gun of, oh, there's the missing performance, except for the fact that running the 7700X in that admin mode also improves the performance in a similar manner. So, in other words, it didn't give really be the smoking gun on where's that generational uplift, but it is an interesting result as far as Windows being weird and hiding some performance unless you're in this admin mode. Now, there's big questions now on why exactly is that happening, and we could speculate about all sorts of reasons it could be happening. Does Windows turn off any kind of stupid, weird background crap that's clogging up CPU performance when you're in this admin mode? Is there some kind of bug where it's just like the CPU's not running optimally in this other mode? All sorts of question marks. Also, again, I'm just showing you the Cyberpunk result, but go through the Hardware Unboxed video and you'll see that in some games, the 9000 series did jump when the 7000 processor didn't. But in others, they jumped similarly, or there was, so overall, it did give a slightly better result for the 9000 series versus the 7000 series when averaged out across 13 games, but it was only like a 1% shift from what they saw previously, so really not enough to throw off the reviews or anything like that. But it certainly is interesting. Now, if some of you are doing, ooh, I want to be in this admin mode to unlock my gaming performance, I would caution on that a little bit, because generally, if any kind of malware infects your computer and you're in this kind of hidden admin mode, my understanding is it would be a lot easier for larger problems to take place on your PC if you're in that mode. So I would caution or do some research on whether it's really a good idea to be in that kind of hidden admin mode more generally. But again, the Hardware Unboxed video does show you how to get into that mode if you're interested. So anyway, so with the lackluster Zen 5 results, maybe the question is, okay, so what about Intel? Well, Intel's been struggling with stability issues on their 13th and 14th gen chips, and yes, they have new microcode out there, but do we really trust that to be a long-term fix? There's kind of the jury's out on that one. But maybe Intel's next generation would hopefully not have the stability issues and would maybe give us the performance gains that we're looking for. Well, we're starting to see some leaked Arrow Lake results, and we're seeing, for example, here reported at Tom's Hardware, that Intel Arrow Lake CPUs were benchmarked on a Z890 motherboards, and they're seeing the Core Ultra 7 265KF up to 4% faster than the Core i9 14900K in Geekbench 6, at least when we're talking about single core results, which might indicate gaming performance. But again, only 4%. However, do keep in mind that the Core Ultra 7 265KF is, again, if we're understanding the naming correctly right with this naming shift, this would more compare to an i7 rather than an i9, which means that it's kind of like your next-gen i7 outperforming the previous generation i9, albeit only by 4% in single-core performance. So Tom's Hardware is targeting this as this CPU disappoints in Geekbench 6. I was scrolling through to see if they had any comparison up against the previous generation i7, as that seems like a more direct predecessor. And they're showing that it's only it showed unimpressive performance against its direct predecessor with the Core i7-14700KF, where it came out, it looks like just a few percent ahead in single core, and then a few percent slower in multi-core. So anyway, the point is, oh no, if our jokes are that we're seeing, Zen 5%, well, are we going to get a Intel generation with only a few percent, single-digit percentage uplifts? And that certainly could be the case, but this is just a leaked result. I wouldn't make too much out of it. The other thing I'd really like to see from Intel is even if their generational performance uplift is perhaps low, if they're able to do it at a much more reasonable power consumption, that would at least be something, because Intel's power consumption compared to AMD on the last few generations has just been absolutely through the roof. Now, also with Intel, we saw that Intel officially postpones their Innovation 2024 event, and that left a lot of people questioning whether Arrow Lake was being delayed. Now, we have seen Intel respond to those rumors, and the response we're seeing is that Core Ultra 200 Arrow Lake is on track. Intel promises significant announcements this fall. So apparently this was Intel responding to OC3D, who questioned them on this, saying there are no changes to Intel's launch plans, timing, or product readiness. We are excited about the new product announcements and momentum we have in store, including significant announcements this fall. We'll share more details on our next-gen desktop processor products, codenamed Arrow Lake, later this year. So we'll have to see what's made of that, but Intel certainly has been in a bit of a rough patch financially and with all these stability issues and all sorts of stuff. So anyway, personally, I've seen some people in the comments like gloating over Intel's issues and all of that, and some people celebrating AMD's issues. And just a reminder that what we'd really like to see as consumers, I would think, would be healthy competition from all parties involved, so that we get good performance gains and the most competitive prices. So I would like to see both companies doing well and competing strongly with each other so that we get the best chips available at the lowest prices. That's what I'd like to see. But a bit more bad news in the CPU space, where we're seeing millions of systems running AMD Ryzen and EPYC CPUs affected by Sinkclose vulnerability, mitigations already rolled out. Now, one thing to note about this is that they're not saying that they have been affected by malware through this. It's just that they have a certain vulnerability. And when I read further into this, it looks like what this is where, due to this vulnerability, if your system was already infected by malware, which had access to your system and a lot of control over it, then they could take advantage of this vulnerability to then do a much deeper infection that would be very difficult to get rid of. However, this is not, I think, a vulnerability that is making it easier to get malware in the first place, as I understand it. And also, again, mitigation's already rolled out. However, it did look like AMD, again, is not going back to super old Zen processors that are beyond their kind of, software support promised, levels. So that is something to think about. Anyway, so I'm just going to throw that out there. You can research that further if you're concerned. But I think for the average day-to-day user, this might not end up being that big of a deal. Again, as long as you're not already infected by some malware, and if you're on a more recent system, you could look at those mitigations. Now, also in the CPU space, if you're just thinking, okay, with all of these issues with AMD's launch being disappointment, Intel's having all sorts of problems, hey, is it ARM that's going to be starting to take the lead in the CPU space if AMD and Intel are just kind of failing on their x86 stuff? Well, I don't know. That we'll have to see what happens. I certainly wasn't massively impressed by Qualcomm's Snapdragon stuff, but they for certain workloads weren't terrible or anything. We'll have to see how that continues to develop. We're also seeing rumors continuing to abound about MediaTek partnering with Nvidia on a PC processor, on an ARM PC processor. And apparently, we're seeing now rumors of reported launch in H1 2025. So first half of 2025. We'll have to see if that actually comes out. But this isn't the first time that we're seeing rumors of a report of Nvidia partnering with MediaTek on some sort of ARM processor for PC. Now, one issue for gamers with the Qualcomm launch was a lot of game compatibility issues, but how much of that was down to issues with Qualcomm, with just ARM support on Windows, and how much of that could be attributed to perhaps not optimal GPU drivers? That's a question, right? And so one thought would be that if we got an Nvidia partnership on an ARM processor, that perhaps we could actually at least get the GPU drivers and maybe GPU performance in a better state compared to what we were seeing from Qualcomm stuff. But again, we'll have to see if anything comes of this, and if so, what to make of it. One last little bit of CPU news is that we are seeing some hints that we might get another X3D chip, but for the AM4 platform and even lower end, with potentially a Ryzen 5 5500 X3D. Now, this is far from confirmed as something that will actually happen. When you follow up on these headlines, where this seems to be coming from is a listing in the Eurasian Economic Union. And not everything that gets listed with them is a product that ends up actually hitting the market. So this could be something on AMD's radar as a potential thing they could do with maybe binned stuff that fell below the levels they needed for something like a 5600 X3D, and that maybe this would be hitting lower clock speeds than what they would advertise on that. So it's something else to do with the silicon and to keep moving those motherboards that are still out there on the market and all of that. I don't know, but this could potentially be really interesting for budget users upgrading on an AM4 platform if it does ever actually come to light. But what about GPU news? So let's dive into this. So I think the most interesting thing I've seen lately was about a week ago, people spotted Intel's Arc Battlemage GPU at 19 gigabit per second memory, 12 gigabytes of memory, and 192-bit memory configuration. Now, that still doesn't tell us really anything about its actual gaming performance or when we'll get it or anything like that. However, it was spotted in boot up information where, we could at least get those specs pulled out of that. So, hey, it's at least hinting that Battlemage stuff is coming. There could be a 12 gigabyte model on the horizon. And, I love to see things above 8 gigabytes. And, if you're looking for a value conscious part, going all the way up to 16 gigabytes of VRAM can be more expensive. So parts coming in at 12 gigabytes, I think could be kind of a nice sweet spot for a value-oriented product. We don't know what the pricing on this will be or when we'll get it or what its performance will be, but hey, anyway, there's at least more hints that the Battlemage incoming with potentially interesting products. We'll have to see. Intel's drivers have been getting a lot better. So yeah, anyway. In worse news in value-oriented parts, at least potentially, we're seeing reports that at least in China, the RX 6600 is kind of drying up. Now that's disappointing to me because when I talk about value-oriented GPUs, the 6600 has been my go-to GPU under $200. Now I'm still seeing it available under $200 in the United States, but if these stop getting produced, that would eventually dry up. Now, along with these rumors, we had seen rumors that AMD would maybe shift to an RX 7400 or 7300 as kind of their low-end products. However, we're now starting to see reports, this is translated from a Chinese outlet, BenchLife, which at least theoretically has contacts within the AIB partner brands and things like that, where they've been talking to the AIB partners who would be producing, at least if there was going to be like a DIY consumer market GPU like this. And they're saying that at this time, there is no news from any of them about a 7400 or a 7300. So if these are being considered by AMD, the AIB partners aren't aware of it, and they seem to be focused on RDNA 4. Now, they're also saying that that doesn't necessarily mean that these couldn't be for like system integrator parts like Dell or HP or Lenovo, and they're not saying it is the case that it's going for them, but it can't be confirmed that it's not. So anyway, so if these are coming, it would more likely be as a system integrator part or that they're not coming at all. Because again, apparently the AIB partners are unaware of these and are focusing on RDNA 4 at this time. Now, in another bit of a hit to AMD's GPU side of things, we had reported a while back about ZLUDA, which was an open source library for running NVIDIA's CUDA on AMD GPUs, but apparently it has now been taken down. And it wasn't NVIDIA asking for it to be taken down. Actually, when you follow this up, the important read is, okay, what happened? The code that was previously here has been taken down at AMD's request. The code was released with AMD's approval through an email, but AMD's legal department now says it's not legally binding, hence the rollback. Before anyone asks, I have received no legal threats or any communication from NVIDIA. And he's saying, what now? Well, at this point, one more hostile corporation does not make much difference. I plan to rebuild ZLUDA. This is from the guy doing the ZLUDA development, just to be clear. When I say I'm quoting him. Anyway, he plans to rebuild ZLUDA starting from the pre-AMD code base. Funding for the project is coming along, and he hopes to be able to share the details in the coming weeks. It will have a different scope and certain features will not come back. The developer had wanted it to be a surprise, but one of those features was support for NVIDIA Gameworks. He had got it working in Batman Arkham Knight, but never finished it, and now that code will never see the light of day. So, anyway, it looks like the developer still intends to get some version of this up and running by going back to the code base pre-working with AMD and funding from them. But that could take time, and again, might not be as fully featured. This wasn't the only product we'd seen talking about getting CUDA apps running on AMD hardware, though. So anyway, but at least for ZLUDA, it looks like that's a major setback. Now, let's move into some other news. We're seeing news that SteamOS support is coming to Asus ROG Ally. Now, we don't have news for exactly when, but we had seen an update from Valve saying for SteamOS saying added support for extra ROG Ally keys. And everybody would be like, well, wait a minute, extra ROG Ally keys? We were unaware there was any ROG Ally keys already supported on SteamOS. In other words, SteamOS didn't support ROG Ally, right? So The Verge had reached out to Steam for comment, and the company's designer, Lawrence Yang, confirmed that work is indeed underway to enable ROG Ally support. He says, the note about ROG Ally keys is related to third-party device support for SteamOS. The team is continuing to work on adding support for additional handhelds on SteamOS. So, hey, cool. Now, they have not confirmed when that will be accomplished and actually up and running or anything like that. But anyway, it does look like at least the long-term game for SteamOS will be to support a variety of handheld devices, not just Valve's first-party stuff, which actually makes a lot of sense given that really SteamOS and like the Steam Deck really originated back with the idea of Steam machines, where Valve wanted third-party hardware all along, and then to run SteamOS rather than Windows. So this really isn't at all out of the blue or anything like that. This makes perfect sense. It'd just be cool to see when we would actually get that. And if Steam is selling games on Steam on whatever hardware this operating system is running on, then Steam benefits, right? Valve benefits. Now, also kind of related to the handheld gaming PC space, I probably just blinded you with that white background, so deal with it. Anyway, compact mode is now in Game Bar for Xbox insiders. So Xbox is announcing that compact mode is now available for Game Bar for Xbox insiders. It's a new experience that simplifies Game Bar, making it more intuitive and easier to navigate on small screens, Windows handhelds, and when playing with a controller. To use the feature, open Game Bar, go to the Settings widget under General, and turn on the compact mode toggle. So, cool. Now, this is also kind of fueling more talk about how a lot of people expect Microsoft to be coming out with an Xbox that is more of a handheld device and could potentially even be more of a handheld PC-like device. But again, we still don't have a lot of official confirmation on when or if we'll ever actually see something like this. But at least it looks like they're making Windows work better for gaming on a handheld style device more seriously, because right now I vastly prefer the SteamOS for the handheld device style stuff than what we get from Microsoft. So anyway, Since we're already talking about handhelds, how about Nintendo Switch 2? Well, reportedly it won't launch before April 2025. This is coming from sources saying no developers they've spoken to expect it to be launching in this financial year. In fact, they've been told not to expect it in the current financial year. A bunch of people he spoke to hope it's out in April or May time, still early next year, not late. So there's that. Now, a couple quick things. We do have Dragon Age the Veilguard having PC requirements. They're not detailed enough for me to really bother with a dedicated video on this. The minimum specs do seem fairly low with a GTX 970 or a 1650 or an R9 290X, with recommended specs up to an RTX 2070 or an RX 5700 XT, but they're not telling us what resolution or frame rate or graphic settings that's targeting. If they release a larger or more detailed system requirement list, I may do a dedicated video on that. We're also getting Chernobylite 2, announced for 2025, but already with PC system requirements. But once again, these are kind of those traditional minimum and recommended specs where it just lists some parts and doesn't really tell you what kind of performance or graphics settings or resolutions you'll be getting with those parts. But we are probably getting Red Dead Redemption 1 on PC. Announcements leaking on PSN. If you haven't seen this yet, in a PSN posting, there was actually a reference to Red Dead Redemption coming to PC for the first time. Specifically, it says Red Dead Redemption features all of the 2023 console version upgrades plus PC-specific enhancements, including support for increased resolutions and frame rates, multiple displays, and other accessories, plus spatial surround sound, which is interesting, but they did end up taking that down. But the fact that that made it there and this text exists means it's probably planned fairly soon. And the last thing I'll mention is just kind of a bit of an uplifting thing, because I had reported a while back that Tango Gameworks, the developers behind Hi-Fi Rush, had been shut down or, kind of gotten rid of by Microsoft. But it looks like they were acquired by PUBG's Krafton. Now, they're not getting all of their IPs that they had developed. However, they are keeping the Hi-Fi Rush IP, so that's cool. Anyway, hopefully you guys found today's video useful and or interesting. If you want to support the work I do here with benchmarks and news and all of that, you can click the join button down below to directly support the channel financially. In return, you get early access to some videos, you get badges on your comments, it's easier for me to find them, and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, you consider that. Totally understand if you don't, no hard feelings, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.